Hello, welcome to Behavioral Health 101, Introduction to Behavioral Health. Today we'll be talking about substance abuse and how we treat it. 22 million people in the United States suffer from a substance use disorder, with the greatest number of people being dependent upon marijuana and a growing number of people developing addictions to prescription drugs. Now, when we say people being dependent upon marijuana, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's physical addiction. It's usually more of an emotional or psychological dependency. Every day, behavioral health professionals are involved in the prevention efforts and in providing treatment service for individuals and families in over 11,000 substance abuse treatment centers in the United States. Substance abuse is one of the most common issues that behavioral health professionals come into contact with. Substance abuse frequently touches the lives of the clients with whom they work. Therefore, it is necessary to be familiar with the dynamics of substance use, substance abuse, substance dependence, and addiction to be able to recognize when it may be a primary or secondary problem for their clients. What that means is a lot of people will use drugs or alcohol to manage their anxiety or depression, with anxiety and depression being the primary problem and their dependence on marijuana or alcohol being the secondary problem. So let's go back in history. Throughout recorded history, people have used psychoactive substances to change how they feel. Prehistoric and ancient civilizations indicate the use of fermented grains and honey to produce alcoholic beverages, and the use of plants containing psychoactive substances in medicinal and religious rituals. Now, the picture on the right is the oracle at Delphi, and for those of you who are big fans of Greek mythology, this may be one of those scenarios that you may have heard of, or Greek ancient history. You would go to the oracle and she would tell you your future. She had a giant, basically pot of steam surrounding her, and what modern day archaeologists have been able to do is identify that what she was actually sitting around were psychedelic fumes that put her in a transitory or high state. So, the oracle was more high than psychic. Some substances, of course, are socially acceptable, and our society sanctions some of these psychoactive substances. In the U.S., it is legal for adults to consume alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine, which are all drugs that affect our central nervous system. The use of other psychoactive drugs in the United States is either prohibited or regulated. So in about half the states in the United States, the medical use of marijuana is allowed, although heavily regulated. Peyote cactus, which is something that they use out west in Native American religious ceremonies. And of course, tobacco, which is used not just domestically, but we export it in a big way. Tobacco is regulated, but it is also one of the most common used psychoactive drugs in the country. And most of us would be saying, wait, tobacco doesn't make me high. No, but it does cause changes in your brain. It is, in essence, a stimulant. Other psychoactive substances commonly used include laudanum, which is an opium-laced alcohol that's used for intense diarrhea. So, you probably haven't had it unless you have had intense diarrhea, which most of us never want to admit to. So how much is too much? Societies have developed ways of responding to individuals whose use of substances cross the line of what is considered acceptable. Societies that regard substance abuse as an illness are more likely to focus on providing treatment. So, if you are in a society that views substance abuse as a moral failing, they are not going to look to provide treatment. They're going to look to punish you. So there is a huge dynamic within the medical field and in politics about whether or not drugs or substances are a moral problem or a medical problem. The term alcoholism was first introduced by a doctor named Magnus Huss in 1849, but it took another 100 years and the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous for the term to become fully accepted. Early efforts to provide treatment for substance abuse began in the United States in the 1800s, prompted by public concern over the problems resulting from increased levels of public drunkenness. And of course, we have to remember back in the 1800s, you had no TV, you had no radio, you had no internet. There was not a lot of choices for your entertainment pleasure, and having a few cocktails at the end of the day might have been the entertainment option that a lot of people selected. Now, the founding fathers, were going back to colonial days, loved their beer. And this is one of those famous sayings that Benjamin Franklin had: beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. However, there was a shift after the colonial period in societal attitudes about the use of alcohol in the United States. Instead of seeing it as a blessing of God, it was increasingly seen as a curse. The temperance movement, which initially focused on encouraging moderate use of alcohol, eventually came to advocate total abstinence from alcohol when it became clear that problem drinkers were frequently unable to maintain moderate drinking. Dr. Benjamin Rush suggested that chronic drunkenness represented a progressive medical condition rather than a moral failure, thus introducing the disease of alcoholism. Attempts to eliminate drug and alcohol problems through legal prohibition began in 1906 with the Pure Food and Drug Act establishing the Food and Drug Administration. It was given the authority to establish that certain drugs required a prescription and warning labels if it was habit-forming. Prior to this time, drugs such as opium and cocaine were freely available and not regulated. So you'll see on the right-hand side there's an advertisement for something called cocaine toothache drops. And you'll notice that the picture shows two young kids, the white picket fence, pretty much as innocent and Norman Rockwellian as you can imagine. And it has the instantaneous cure. It's the huge price of 15 cents and for sale by all druggists. In 1914, the Harrison Act regulated the medical use of certain drugs such as opium, morphine, cocaine, and at the same time criminalized the non-medical use of these same drugs. The temperance movement was successful in establishing alcohol prohibition laws in many states, and eventually the ratification of the 18th Amendment in 1919 made the manufacture, transportation, and sale of alcohol illegal in the United States. If you are interested in learning more about prohibition and why the United States eventually voted to adopt prohibition, the documentary filmmaker Ken Burns has a wonderful multi-part documentary about prohibition. Essentially, a lot of people who voted for prohibition thought it only meant hard liquor and didn't realize it also meant beer and wine. Ironically, the churches and some temples were still allowed to use wine as part of their rituals. And so suddenly a lot of people became Catholic because the Catholics used wine in their ceremonies. So there were some very entertaining and ironic ways. Also, ultimately, when something is not allowed, it becomes more appealing. And furthermore, the fact of the matter is most people learned how to make their own booze or found someone to hook them up. So it lasted about 14 years, and it was repealed in the 21st Amendment in 1933, ending prohibition and thereby legalizing the manufacture and sale of alcohol once again in the United States. So, the common belief now is that prohibition was a failure. But the textbook points out that if you look at the examination of medical records concerning diseases caused by excess alcohol consumption, as well as criminal justice records, shows that prohibition did reduce health problems, domestic violence, crime, and consumption. However, it also led to the rise of organized crime, the distribution of bootlegged liquor, which was in fact often poisonous, and a flouting of the law by the average citizen. So if you think nowadays how you pretty much know people off the top of your head who are law-abiding, go to jobs every day, have families, but who smoke pot at night or with friends at a party, that's basically the same kind of concept. One of the many reasons prohibition was repealed was to get the economy moving. Taxes on alcohol became a major source of revenue for the government that was dealing with the Great Depression, which started in 1929. At that time, in 1929, Herbert Hoover was president, and he really didn't do much to help the economy get out of the doldrums. So in 1932, when the election happened, he was unceremoniously booted out of the White House, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt came in, and repealing prohibition was one of the first things he did to get the economy moving. Throughout the 1930s, there were few resources that offered help or hope for those with drug and alcohol problems. AA was developed by two men, known simply as Dr. Bob and Bill W. in Akron, Ohio in 1935, grew to a worldwide organization with over 50,000 meetings. These types of meetings represent a major component in the development of current treatments of addictions, and we'll talk about these in more detail later on in the presentation. So, who is drinking and taking what kind of stuff? In 2011, an estimated 133 million North Americans, ages 12 and up, were current drinkers of alcohol, and that's about half the population. 58 million people over the age of 12, just under 23% of our population, engaged in binge drinking. Binge drinking is defined as 5 or more drinks in one setting over the past 30 days. 16 million people over the age of 12 engaged in heavy drinking and illicit drug use. Heavy drinking is when you binge 5 or more times in the last 30 days. Marijuana is the most commonly used illicit drug, followed by psychotherapeutics such as non-medical use of prescription drugs, cocaine, hallucinogens, and the ever-popular inhalants. So how we have treated addiction in the 20th century has evolved. And it has evolved not always in the best ways. The growth of AA played a major role in the acceptance of the medical model of addiction treatment. The establishment of private health insurance provided increased access to treatment for a greater percentage of the population, so that's a good thing. However, private health insurance in turn led to a significant increase in the number of substance abuse treatment services combined at both the public and private level. In other words, the insurance companies wanted less expensive options, which is why it is difficult to often get a long-term stay at a rehab facility. With this change came further professionalization of the field. So let's get back to these insurance companies again. The development of managed care as a means of controlling rising health costs led a shift from inpatient hospital treatment to outpatient services as the treatment setting most frequently authorized and approved by insurance carriers. This little cartoon on the right-hand side is a excellent manifestation of how things go these days. The doctor examines the patient, decides on a course of action, submits it to the insurance company for approval, and then someone at the insurance company, most often a person with some medical training but not at the level of the doctor, makes the decision yes or no. Each of these factors has a significant impact on how the behavioral health professionals provide substance abuse treatment today. So let's talk about the consequences of drug and alcohol abuse. The consequences in the United States are enormously costly, especially in terms of family discord, neglect and/or abuse of children, personal misery, financial problems, medical problems, fetal alcohol syndrome, HIV infection, lower work productivity, and job loss. So if you're, as an aside, if you would like to read a book where the father is an alcoholic and all of these, pretty much, except for the HIV, are discussed, there is a book called Angela's Ashes. And it goes into detail about the narrator's father who's an alcoholic, and it is one of the most depressing books I've ever read in my life. Most experts describe alcohol and drug dependence as a chronic and progressive disease that is influenced by one's environment. And in extreme cases, dependence on alcohol drugs can be fatal. These statistics also reinforce the need for all behavioral health professionals to have a working knowledge of addiction so they can accurately assess the needs of their clients. During the second half of the 20th century, the treatment community focused less on the differences between alcohol abuse and the abuse of other drugs and more on the similarities that existed between them. So, basically, if you were addicted to cocaine or if you were an alcoholic, your issues were perceived the same. Most treatment plans today are designed to meet the specific needs of the client with alcohol and or other drug problems. And currently treatment professionals use the broad term of substance abuse disorders, and that's what the DSM calls it. You'll see over here on the right, there's a SAMHSA from 2013 comparison. There's about 17 million people in the United States who identify as alcoholics and just about 7 million who identify as drug addicts. It's interesting that despite those numbers, no one would ever want to make alcohol illegal again. So now we're going to move on to some very specific terminology that's very important to know. Defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, individuals are described as abusing a substance when they continue to use the substance despite experiencing negative consequences from their use, including health problems, difficulties in their family, work, and social life, and financial and legal problems. Individuals are dependent on the substance when, in addition to these negative consequences, they build tolerance and experience withdrawal if they stop using the drug. The range of severity of withdrawal symptoms varies from the individual and with the amount of use. Withdrawal experienced from some drugs can be life-threatening and therefore require medical supervision. So, for example, if you are detoxing from benzodiazepine addiction, Valium, Xanax, Ativan, that should be done in a hospital. Some alcoholics need to be hospitalized to detox because they have so many other health issues that are occurring. So there are many elements to addictions counseling that occur even before the person has reached baseline sobriety. Keeping in mind that addiction now, we perceive it, is not a character flaw. But for thousands of years, addiction was primarily seen as a result of the individual's moral failure. More recently, theories have been developed that incorporate new knowledge from psychology, biology, and medicine. Inaba and Cohen identified 3 prevalent models for understanding addiction. Addictive disease model, which is also known as the medical model, behavioral or environmental model, and the academic model. I put this picture on the slide just because I thought it was pretty great that it was a cure for drunks, and what it really is, it's booze with a little bit of cocaine in it. I'm sure that'll make us all feel so much better. So the addictive disease model is defined as an impairment of health or a condition of abnormal functioning. This model stresses that addiction, like other diseases, has identifiable symptoms, a predictable course, and a likely outcome if left untreated. Genetic influences may result in a predisposition, making the development of the disease more likely. And research has shown that if a young man has a father who's an alcoholic, that young man has a very high chance of also becoming an alcoholic. So, same gender parenting has a huge influence. So what you see here on the right is a physical or graphical representation of what we see with an addictive disease model. You use the drug first, you feel great, it's that positive reinforcement, you repeat that drug use, the sensitization of drug wanting, but not drug liking. So you're always chasing that initial feeling, that initial euphoria. Then you realize that things are really bad in your life, you try to be abstinent, but that compulsive desire for the drug doesn't let up, and you relapse, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. So moving on to the behavioral or environmental model, this developmental model describes the possible progression of substance use through 6 stages. Abstinence, meaning no use of alcohol or drugs. So when you're 6 years old and mommy is having her mommy juice and she says, no, this is mommy juice, you are pretty much abstinence. Experimentation, which is marked by curiosity that leads to limited use. You're 14, you're at a party, somebody has a bottle of something and you try it and it tastes gross, but you tried it. Then there's the social or recreational use, which is marked by seeking out drugs and alcohol in these settings. Hey, where's the bar? As soon as you get to a party. Habituation, meaning repeated use without negative consequences, meaning every night after you go to work, you come home, you crack open a beer, and you watch the news before dinner. Abuse, which is defined as continued use despite negative consequences. So you got a DUI because you stopped and you had some cocktails on your way home. Your wife is really mad at you, or your husband's really mad at you for drinking all the time in front of the children. There's all kinds of negative consequences that are occurring. You were late for work, so you lose your job. Then you move into addiction, which is meaning you're abusing plus the presence of tolerance and withdrawal. Drinking 3 beers is no longer going to cut it. You need to drink 3 beers and 3 glasses of whiskey to even feel slightly buzzed. It is not until one reaches the stages of abuse and addiction that behaviors of continuing to use despite negative consequences begin to occur. Then we have our academic model. Changes occur at the cellular level and result in the development of tolerance, meaning that as a person becomes resistant to the drug's effects, they will need increasing amounts of the drug to achieve the desired effects. Tissue dependence occurs when the body has become so accustomed to the drug that it needs the drug to feel normal. A lot of times you'll hear addicts talking about their drug as if it's their medicine. And they talk about it this way because they really do feel like they need their medicine. Pleasurable effects of the drug and the ongoing desire for that feeling may result in a psychological dependence, which is what you often see with marijuana. If use is interrupted, the person may experience uncomfortable physical and psychological symptoms known as withdrawal. Inaba and Cohen propose that it is actually a combination of these models that best explains the predisposition and process by which addiction develops over the course of one's life. So you take all three of those and you put them in a giant snowball, and that's really what addiction looks like. Each provides a type of lens through which an individual's substance abuse problem can be understood and solutions explored. They do not need to be one or the other. So let's talk about psychoactive substances. Inaba and Cohen defined a psychoactive drug as any substance that directly alters the normal functioning of the central nervous system, and divided psychoactive drugs into these three broad categories: uppers, downers, and all-arounders. Uppers are central nervous stimulants like cocaine, amphetamines, including methamphetamine, caffeine, and nicotine. This category includes both legal and illicit drugs. They affect the brain's energy chemicals, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and other neurotransmitters. Tolerance builds quickly with stimulant drugs. Abuse and addiction can develop quickly. Keep in mind, people start smoking nicotine usually in their teen years, and by the time they are adults, true adults in their mid to late 20s, and they're looking to quit, they are addicted to cigarettes. And because of that, they have a really hard time walking away from the cigarettes, even though they have learned all of the negatives that are associated with smoking. Physical and psychological problems: depression, paranoia, psychosis, insomnia, cardiovascular problems, and weight loss. So, for any of you who have watched the television show Breaking Bad, methamphetamine is something you have definitely heard of. It is also known as meth, crystal, or crank. It is a highly addictive synthetic stimulant, which has grown in popularity and is now a problem across the country among both genders and across a variety of lifestyles. It is especially problematic in rural areas in the United States. It is one of those unique synthetic stimulants or synthetic drugs that, given just a basic understanding of chemistry, people can pretty much make on their own, which is one of the reasons why it has become such an issue. Symptoms of methamphetamine use include the inability to sleep, increased sensitivity to noise, nervous physical activity such as scratching, irritability, dizziness or confusion, extreme anorexia, tremors, convulsions, increased heart rate, and blood pressure. And here's a couple of pictures of people as they have aged, and they are both meth addicts. This is from the website Faces of Meth. One of the big problems with meth is that the most caustic chemicals go into meth. Things like Drano, ammonia, things that really no one would ever put inside their bodies, but if it can get you high, sure, let's try it. It literally eats away at your teeth. It destroys your skin. You know, it's just a really unpleasant side effect. It has become a significant social problem because of how highly addictive it is, and because of how it destroys the body and the mind, including damage to the heart and the brain, the physical appearance, rapid weight loss, accelerated aging, severe facial blemishes, and rotting teeth. For those of you who have watched the show Orange is the New Black, Pennsatucky, before she got her new teeth, she was a meth head with really bad teeth. Meth use has had a significant impact on various social systems within the country, including the criminal justice system, public health, and child welfare agencies. A lot of times you'll hear stories about a RV or a trailer where people were cooking meth and there was a toddler hanging out in his little playpen 3 feet away. Behavioral health professionals within all these areas will be affected by this epidemic in one way or the other, so it is vitally important that they remain well informed of meth use trends and ongoing treatment options. So, one of the latest things is people using meth while they're having sex, and it is a very dangerous thing because meth also reduces your inhibitions, and what ends up happening a lot of times is meth lowers the inhibitions so much that HIV is transferred because people are not wearing condoms, they're not practicing safe sex, and HIV rates have skyrocketed in these communities. The next category are downers. Downers are central nervous system depressants, slowing down its overall functioning. They include painkillers, morphine, Vicodin, OxyContin, sedatives, sedative hypnotics, Valium, Xanax, alcohol. Depressants slow the heart rate and respiration. They relax the muscles, dull the senses, and diminish the pain and induce sleep. Tolerance builds with repeated use. Side effects of the drug include loss of coordination, impaired judgment, memory problems, and the development of physical dependence. Now, this is where we see OxyContin becoming the bad guy. It is a very strong painkiller, but with painkillers, they also contain a chemical that induces a feeling of euphoria, and that's what people are chasing when they get high on oxy. Finally, we have our all-arounders. These describe psychedelics, including marijuana, LSD, phenocyclide, which is angel dust, MDMA, which is ecstasy, and mescaline, which is sort of like peyote. Side effects include increased appetite and respiratory damage, and that's with marijuana, bad trips and flashbacks with LSD, and then increased blood pressure, amnesia, and combativeness with our angel dust. Other drugs commonly abused include inhalants such as glue, metallic paints, and nitrous oxide, anabolic steroids, and other performance-enhancing drugs, including synthetic steroids and testosterone. And you might say, hey, I'm a dude, I already have testosterone in my system. Yes, but if we add more testosterone and more testosterone, then it works as almost like an anabolic steroid. It just gives you more of that aggressive, manly musculature kind of thing. It just basically is going to kill you in the end anyway, so you have to be very careful. A growing concern in the United States is the abuse of prescription drugs. The National Center on Addiction and Abuse at Columbia University conducted a 3-year study of the abuse and diversion of prescription medications, including opioids, stimulants, a stimulant meaning something like Adderall, depressants, and steroids. The study found that from 1992 to 2003, the number of Americans who abused controlled prescription drugs had nearly doubled, from 7.8 million to 15.1 million. Now that was 10, 15 years ago. It has probably doubled since then again. The problem is that you have a large group of pharmaceutical companies that want to make a lot of money. And we go back to economics with supply and demand. The demand for painkillers is high. People get hurt. We get hurt at work. We get hurt at home. We get hurt in our cars. And things like back pain and shoulder pain and neck pain, they will sometimes be debilitating. And instead of having a way to manage pain in a different option, a lot of times doctors will prescribe painkillers for a significant amount of time, and then the patient gets cut off and the patient is officially addicted to the painkillers, so they turn to heroin. And sometimes they can't afford their opioids, so they turn to heroin because heroin is cheaper. In assessing for substance abuse problems, service providers are encouraged to explore their use of prescription drugs with their clients in addition to their use of any street drugs. One of the most common issues with substance abusing clients is helping the client acknowledge that their substance abuse is in fact a problem. Clients who have lost relationships, jobs, and money because of their use may still defend their alcohol or drug consumption. And again, if you have ever watched the television show Intervention, you'll know that people will spend the vast majority of that show validating and rationalizing why they use a certain substance, whether it be alcohol, heroin, or meth. They need it, it's their medicine, it helps them feel better, whatever. And even when they are confronted by their families with the havoc they have wrought in their lives, they still don't want to stop. That is substance abuse in a nutshell. So, what gets a person to admit that they actually have a problem? Traditionally, addiction treatment professionals have thought it necessary for those addicted to drugs or alcohol to hit bottom before they recognize that they have a problem and that they need treatment. For the family, friends, and loved ones of the substance user, the first thing they must do is stop enabling, and to instead allow their loved one to suffer the natural consequences of their use. So some of the examples of enabling include giving money to the addict or gambler, repairing property the addict broke while drunk or high, lying to the addict's employer to cover up their absenteeism, making excuses for the addict, or bailing him or her out of jail. All of these are enabling activities that, when you have a loved one who has an addiction issue, you don't necessarily want them sitting in a jail cell for 3 days. But on the other hand, as soon as they get out, they are going to go find more drugs or, get a bottle of something and continue on their merry way. These folks have one goal in mind, and that is to get high or drunk. And whoever hurts does not matter because it's all about them. It's almost like they've become a narcissist based exclusively on their so-called need for this medication that they like to call it. And it's actually just drug abuse or alcohol abuse. Interventions typically bring together all concerned individuals in the life of substance abusers in order to confront them with the negative consequences of their substance abuse. They are usually joined by an intervention specialist. The participants share ways that their own lives have been negatively affected by the substance abuser's use of drugs and or alcohol, encourage the person to enter treatment. The goal is to initiate a crisis that will result in change. So again, what you're trying to do with an intervention is bring all of the people that are important to the addict to the same room and express how their lives have been damaged by the addict. So in a sense, you're using a little bit of shame, which, by the way, is a very effective tool in the criminal justice system, is to shame someone. And it's much more effective than putting them in a cell and letting them hang out all day. So the idea here is to get them to a point where they realize how much bad they've done and that they have no other choice but to start and go into rehab that very day. Another common way to help the substance abusers recognize their need for treatment is through the use of motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is a directive, client-centered counseling style for eliciting behavior change by helping clients to explore and resolve ambivalence. In other words, the counselor helps the client discuss the positive and negative sides of changing their current substance use or behavior. So the therapist is sitting with their client who has a alcohol abuse disorder, And they're going back and forth talking about, well, I like to drink and it makes me feel better and I have to put up with my husband and my kids. And the negatives, well, I have a DUI, so I can't drive and I have to pay all this money, and my kids don't like to watch me drink because I have wine for breakfast, and so on and so forth. In recognizing the cost that they pay for maintaining their substance use, individuals may become more willing to choose to make a change. So, being willing to change. Willingness to change is understood as occurring in stages. There are therapeutic models that allow the behavioral health professional to build trust with the client as they move through the stages. Pre-contemplation, contemplation, determination, and action. And you'll see on the right-hand side the stages. Now, I'm stopping at action, but it does go on to relapse and maintenance. So, pre-contemplation is the stage people are in before they ever give any thought to the need to change their behavior. You know, they're still getting high every day, drinking, partying, doing whatever they're doing that's ruining everybody's lives. It hasn't even occurred to them that they should change. Then, as substance abusers explore what they see as both the positive and the negative aspects of their use, they may begin to contemplate a need for change. Clinicians may help clients look at various ways to solve the problems associated with substance abuse, increasing the client's determination to make a change. Then, the client decides to take action, such as stopping their substance abuse or entering a treatment program. As with all areas of human services, gender and culture play a significant role in individuals' perceptions of a problem and their attitude toward receiving help. Cultural sensitivity also involves practitioners being aware of how their own attitudes and beliefs have been influenced by their cultural background. It is important to keep in mind that even the concept of seeking professional help outside of one's family reflects a Western worldview, which is the idea that outsiders are appropriate sources of assistance. So in the United States, we love to talk about ourselves. We will go to a therapist and we will ramble on. But if you go to Japan, it is not considered normal to talk about yourself. It's considered rude. Clients who have difficulty sharing feelings with members of the opposite sex, looking directly at another group member when they speak to them, or confronting an older group member may be reflecting their cultural norms rather than resistance. In most treatment programs utilizing the medical model, abstinence is seen as the necessary first step in treatment. This means that the person commits to completely eliminating the use of alcohol and all illicit drugs. In some programs, this includes elimination if even medically prescribed psychoactive drugs and pain medication. Abstinence is seen as the necessary beginning point before all other problems can be accurately assessed and addressed. But it is not the only goal of treatment. Harm reduction can include a variety of goals, designed to limit the negative consequences for both the individual and society of substance use for those unwilling or unable to achieve abstinence. This approach is more likely to be advocated by programs working with clients dealing with other problems in addition to their substance abuse disorder, such as homelessness or mental illness. Advocates for harm reduction argue that clients must overcome many obstacles to enter treatment, and that if they are required to be abstinent prior to entering a treatment program, they may never do so. Harm reduction approach favors meeting people where they are, not where we would like them to be. So, for example, there is a center in California that has developed a model of very small apartments, kind of like dorm rooms, kind of a 10 by 10 kind of room, and it is available to people who are homeless. They move in, they have an addiction issue, usually alcohol, because they're generally older clients. They tend to be senior citizens, and they're allowed to drink in the facility. And it was a very controversial idea when it first opened, because they were like, well, we don't want them to drink. And they said, well, they're going to drink whether or not we say it. So if we just let them drink, they're going to be more comfortable. And what has happened is homelessness has gone down, and the alcoholics who live there actually drink less because they're not quite as, they don't feel like their behavior is being forced upon them. And so there's all kinds of interesting new ideas being thrown out there, because addiction is such a unique, individualized experience for people. Now, you've seen these initials, but I'm not sure if you know what they stand for. It is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. It is a government administration under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This governmental agency lists over 11,000 addiction treatment programs on its online resource directory, including outpatient, residential, hospital inpatient, and partial hospitalization day treatment programs. From the earliest days of treatment in the United States, addiction treatment has been funded by both public, i.e. government, and private sources. Payment by private insurers, out-of-pocket payment by the receiving treatment, or payment by charitable sources. So let's first begin talking about public programs. Although there is a source of ongoing public policy debate, there has been a general consensus that money invested in providing substance abuse treatment is well spent. One study found that for every dollar spent on substance abuse treatment, $7 are saved in reduced healthcare, crime, lost productivity, and the like. Studies have also established that it is significantly less expensive to provide treatment to substance abusers than to incarcerate them. In 2013, a study conducted by Temple University and the Triangle Research Institute in North Carolina found that if just 10% of eligible offenders were sent to community-based treatment programs rather than prison, the criminal justice system would save $4.8 billion compared to our current practices. From 1988 to 1998, the value of insurance coverage for addiction treatment had declined by 75% for employees who participated in group health plans offered by mid to large size companies. So what we're seeing here is insurance companies are offering less services for addiction treatment, which is ironic because as the years have gone on, we begin to understand more and more that addiction is more of a disease than a moral failing. One of the most challenging tasks a behavioral health professional is asked to do is to help navigate the managed care system. 28 to 30-day inpatient programs, which were popular in the 1980s, are no longer a realistic option for many people. Behavioral health professionals need to be aware of other treatment options and should be familiar with the types of programs, both public and private, available locally to meet the client's needs. So there are private establishments that work with charities that can provide assistance to addicts who cannot afford or do not have insurance. Community-based care. The currently accepted goal is that communities provide a continuum of care so that individuals, groups, and families can receive the form of substance abuse treatment most appropriate for their needs. This concept acknowledges both that different people have different treatment needs and that an individual's needs vary over his or her course of treatment. Prevention services are generally targeted to populations known to be at a higher risk for substance abuse. Treatment of substance abuse problems is a complex process that occurs in stages over a period of time. Recovery from substance abuse is often described as being a process, not an event. You don't get sober and that's it. It is a long, slow slog towards that feeling of true sobriety. So it's important to watch for warning signs. In addition to their role in providing services that can help prevent and treat substance abuse, behavioral health professionals are often in a position to recognize warning signs of drug use in their clients, i.e. poor physical appearance, mood swings, losing one's job. Now, this person on the right-hand side is Whitney Houston, who sadly passed away a few years ago. Towards the end of her career, she was pretty much a mess. She was addicted to crack cocaine, and as you can see, she looked pretty bad. The reality is that when a person is so strung out on drugs, they're going to look really, really bad. And you, as a professional, will be able to identify that. For the professional in a practice setting outside of a substance abuse treatment center, such as a JOBS program, screening may be part of the normal intake procedure. So depending on the facility where you work, screening for drug addiction may be part and parcel of your job. So some of the risk factors that the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention identify include substance abuse by parents or other family members, substance use by peers and the perception that everyone is doing it, pre-adolescent use of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Now remember, pre-adolescent, meaning before the age of 12, being a victim of physical or sexual abuse, abusive or violent entertainment at home or in school, and economic deprivation. Now, let me just jump back to this abusive or violent at home or in school. Abusive or violent environment at home or in school basically means that what you see is dad's beating up on mom or mom beats the kids. These types of behaviors create a lot of anxiety and stress, and the young person wants to escape, and they use the drugs and alcohol to escape the anxiety they feel about walking on eggshells all the time. So medically supervised detox is something that is very important for several addictive issues. Clinicians who deal directly with substance abusers need to be able to assess if a client is in need of medically supervised detoxification, and if so, whether it can be provided on an outpatient basis or requires hospitalization. Assessment would require not just the recognition of a problem, but the ability to refer to the appropriate level of treatment. These skills needed to screen for a possible problem and initiate a referral for further assessment and possible treatment would appropriately be considered part of a generalist human services practice. Many assessment tools have been developed to assist clinicians and healthcare providers in the assessment of substance abuse problems. The 4-item CAGE questionnaire, which I have listed below, and the 25-question Michigan Alcoholism Screening Test are designed to identify the presence of negative consequences of alcohol use that indicate a need for intervention. The CAGE questionnaire asks the following questions. Number 1, have you ever felt you needed to cut down on your drinking? Number 2, have people annoyed you by criticizing your drinking? Number 3, have you ever felt guilty about drinking? Number 4, have you ever felt you needed a drink first thing in the morning to steady your nerves or to get rid of a hangover? So obviously, if you've answered yes to 2 or more of these, you may seriously consider attending an AA meeting to see whether or not you feel like you may have a problem. During the period of rapid growth of alcohol and treatment programs from the 1960s to the 1980s, few professionally trained counselors had specialty training in addiction treatment. Frontline counselors who conducted much of the individual and group counseling came to the field by way of personal experience in recovery. Such counselors were often described as paraprofessionals. It was common for individuals to successfully graduate or phase out of treatment and return almost immediately as a member of the treatment team. There were issues with the paraprofessionals. So making the transition from resident or patient in a program to being a counselor was generally not very easy. Over time, most programs developed policies to address the common problems that arose. For example, programs might require a graduate of their program to have a minimum of 1 to 2 years of sobriety after completing the program before they could be hired as an employee. Many steps have been taken to advance the training of substance abuse counselors. Certifications and professional organizations at the state and national level have grown extensively in recent years. College programs for behavioral health professionals, marriage and family therapists, social workers, and psychologists have added substance abuse training to their normal course of studies. So now we're going to move on to the process of recovery. Terence Gorski regards abstinence from mood-altering chemicals as a necessary first step in learning what to do to get and stay healthy in all areas of life. Sobriety, as described by Gorski, involves abstinence plus a return to full physical, psychological, social, and spiritual health. Individuals must determine what functions their substance use provided for them and how they will go about meeting those needs in healthier ways in the future. For most clients, their substance use has led to multiple losses: family, friends, jobs, and health. Grieving these losses is another significant treatment issue. Most clients also become increasingly aware of the way that their use has harmed others and must deal with the associated feelings of guilt and shame. Relapse means that a trigger occurs which increases the risk of the client returning to their substance abuse. Relapse prevention draws on cognitive behavioral strategies to help clients build skills to maintain abstinence and to address relapse should it occur. Individuals are taught to recognize potential triggers for relapse. Counselors also encourage clients to plan their response should they relapse. Clients are educated to understand that addiction is a disease that is prone to relapse, and they are encouraged to be active in their efforts to prevent it. So, when we are talking about someone who is sober, that means almost like that, much like cancer, where the possibility of cancer returning is possible, with alcoholism or addiction, relapse is possible. You want to avoid any potential triggers that will bring you back into that likelihood of returning to substance abuse issues. So, for example, if there are certain friends who are always getting high, you need to stay away from them because they may be a trigger that will encourage you to relapse. One of the most challenging aspects of community support is identifying and familiarizing oneself with all the types of programs generally available in their community. Depending upon the state, city, and town, different resources will be funded by public and private sources. The professionals who are employed in each of these settings are providing the core treatment services of counseling and case management, but community resources provide support to ensure continued sobriety. Detox is not the end, it is the means to the end. Clients who have become physically addicted to drugs or alcohol need to detox for the medical management of their withdrawal. Although detox is generally regarded as necessary before treatment can begin, some clients will seek detox as an end in itself, as a way to find housing or reduce their tolerance so they can reduce the cost of their drug intake. Behavioral health professionals play a key role in encouraging clients to remain in treatment despite the discomfort of withdrawal and the urge to leave and resume their substance abuse. Most inpatient programs utilize what is known as the Minnesota model of treatment, which has begun in the 1940s and the 1950s in 3 treatment programs in Minnesota: the Pioneer House, Hazelden, and Willmar State Hospital. Developed over time, a defining concept of the Minnesota model was an understanding of addiction as a primary, progressive disease rather than a symptom of other problems that would be the focus of treatment, with lifetime abstinence as the goal. Seeing addiction as affecting all areas of a person's life, treatment was provided by a multidisciplinary team including doctors, nurses, psychologists, social workers, and clergy. Partial hospitalization allows patients to attend the all-day activities provided at the inpatient program while returning to their home to sleep. Because the costs are reduced, insurance companies may authorize more treatment days for partial hospitalization than inpatient care. Although inpatient programs may be referred to as residential, the distinction made here is that residential treatment is more likely to occur in a home-like setting over a longer period of time, providing less medical care than a hospital program. Residential programs, however, provide 24-hour supervision. Other residential programs. Behavioral health professionals serve in many treatment roles in residential programs, such as case manager, counselor, clinical director, or program manager. Some residential programs provide a step down or transition from inpatient treatment or detox. They include halfway houses or sober living facilities where residents experience living in a supportive community free of drugs and alcohol, but may continue their employment during the day. Another option is outpatient treatment. Provides community-based treatment including psychoeducational lecture, group and individual counseling, and activities designed to enhance life skills. IoT has grown in popularity as inpatient treatment has become less common. The number of hours patients are involved in treatment decreases as their length of sobriety increases. Step-down aftercare services may be available for a year or longer. Traditional outpatient counseling, where a client sees a counselor once a week, is usually inadequate for a client with a serious substance abuse problem. Clinicians should be aware that a client's substance abuse will severely affect their ability to participate in counseling and should consider referring their clients to appropriate substance abuse treatment. One of the bigger issues that I briefly addressed earlier in this presentation was substance abuse and mental illness. The use of medication to treat substance abuse and substance abusers has been a source of ongoing debate. Much of substance abuse treatment has been provided in a quote-unquote drug-free program. Some argue that a substance abuser must be drug-free for some period of time before being accurately diagnosed with a mental illness. Others maintain that providing medication for mental illness, such as depression, anxiety, or bipolar disorder, would serve to enhance the success of the substance abuse treatment. Recent epidemiologic studies have shown that between 30 to 60% of drug abusers have concurrent mental health diagnoses, including personality disorders, major depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. Because the comorbidity rate of substance abuse and mental disorders is so high, there has been a growing emphasis on the importance of clinicians in both substance abuse and mental health treatment being aware of the special needs of dual diagnosis patients who suffer from both disorders. 12-step programs play a significant role in the treatment of addiction, both as a primary source of support and as backup to a professional treatment. Because they are free, well-known, and widely available, self-help groups represent a major resource to behavioral health professionals and their clients. Commonly referred to as self-help programs, they reflect the belief that a person who suffers from addiction, has received help, and has maintained their sobriety is in the best position to help a fellow sufferer. Providing this help to newcomers helps the older member to stay sober. Finally, family support groups are equally important. Support groups such as Al-Anon, Alateen, and Codependence Anonymous also provide ongoing support for family members and friends. Family members come to understand that in focusing too much on the substance abuser, they have neglected taking care of themselves. Family members can, therefore, benefit from treatment even if their chemically addicted family member never participates in treatment. If you have a family member who is an alcoholic or a drug addict, there are ways to manage, and it is by hooking up with one of these types of groups that can produce for you an opportunity to be with like-minded people and to see how you can manage your life, even if your spouse or loved one refuses to get any help. Couple works cited in addition to the textbook. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to text or email me or leave a comment. Otherwise, have a fabulous day.